Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be doing the second iteration of ranking all 8 USFL head coaches. We did this last year in February, but that was mainly due to the fact that we didn't know the coaches for a long time, but now pretty much we know all of them, as there's pretty much no rumors of any of these guys leaving or getting changed anytime soon, at least right now. So this is going to be the ranking for the 2023 USFL season. Now, as this is going to be done, I'm going to show the overall rank improvement or deprovement from last year, whether that be that coach or just that team's head coach in theory. You'll see. I'll show their most interesting or intriguing game and their intriguing stat, as well as just give my thoughts overall. So, without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 8 is literally to not a single person surprise, Kirby Wilson. This is arguably the easiest choice of maybe any ranking ever. Kirby was by far the worst coach in the league last year. The most notable stat is the fact that he started 4 separate quarterbacks due to benching. It's not like these guys got torn ACLs, broken ankles, all that. No, he went through Kyle Lauletta, Josh Love, Roland Rivers, Vadley, just kept on changing them, would bench guys way too early, especially Vadley, just after he had won their only game of the season. And just overall, he did a terrible job. He had a couple defensive players do really solid, but overall for him, he was supposed to be this guy that would make a great running team. He was supposed to build the O-line and the running backs. Instead, he was okay at that. Garrett Groshek was decent, but overall, they had really no sustainable great running game. And the most notable game is the Week 10 game against the Michigan Panthers. Unlike the NFL, well, mainly due to, the USFL just deciding it right before the game, they decided that the Michigan Panthers-Maulers game, which was between two 1-8 teams, would have the winner get the first overall pick in 2023 rather than the loser. And in the most important game of the entire year, Kirby Wilson laid a goose egg. If you watch that game, it was not close at all. The Panthers easily won 33-21. The Maulers got completely outclassed in that game, and overall just beat, and a lot of that is due to good old Wilson's terrible coaching. He is the worst coach in the league by a mile. I mean, before heading into the season last year, you see I had him at 7, but that was just because of, I guess the UNC hate I had for, Larry Fedor. But Kirby, even back then, I said was a bad coach, or of the two, he was one of the 2 bad coaches in theory. And technically, I wasn't wrong. It's just I wasn't as right as I should have been, because I should have just called him the worst. But I thought, he had all these years of experience in the NFL as a running back coach. Surely it's not like his running game wouldn't be that great. And guess what? It was okay. So yeah, Kirby Wilson at 8 to no one's surprise. Coming in at number 7 is Jeff Fisher. He is the farthest falling coach, or team's farthest falling coach of the entire USFL, as he was ranked at number 2 heading into the season last year by me, and now he is 7. To put it simply, we didn't get the Houston Oilers / Tennessee Titans Jeff Fisher. We instead got the LA Rams Jeff Fisher, which is not that good. He played multiple quarterbacks, but that was due to a multitude of reasons. But overall, his team went 2-8. But the stat that's most notable is the 2 wins were against the 1-9 Maulers, the worst team in the league, led by the worst coach in the league, led by the worst quarterback group of the league. That's who Jeff Fisher beat twice. So yes, he did beat the one that mattered the most, but the most notable game was Week 4 against the Stars to get back to 500. I did a whole video about this one a while back. I'll have it on the eye thing at the top right. To put it simply, it was a terrible decision. He had enough time to run another play, potentially 2 plays at the end of the game, to get the field goal to be closer. They didn't, and then they ended up missing the kick literally by a yard or 2, which just showed how bad Fisher was at managing the game at the end. And overall, that kind of management really hurt him in the long run. They had multiple games, especially at the start of the year, where if they had literally 2 plays go a different way, they could have ended the year potentially 500. But instead, they just kept on blowing it. Though at the last game of the season, they did win to get the first overall pick. So hopefully for him, he can, ride the ship a bit better. But overall, man, the Panthers they weren't it. Coming in at number 6 is the first person that is not moving at the list at all, and Todd Haley. I said last year that he was the most volatile coach, he'd either be really good or really bad, and he was pretty bad. He wasn't awful, but to put it simply, he would have been at the bottom if it wasn't for the fact that Kirby and Jeff were just so bad, because Haley's team was supposed to be the best team. Everyone viewed them as, at worst, the second best team. They had Taumu, they had his center from the Battlehawks, they had a great supporting cast of coaches, and instead they went 4-6 and missed the playoffs. The most notable stat, however, is that all 4 wins were against non-playoff teams, which is not that good. They beat the Gamblers twice, and then they beat the Maulers and the Panthers. So it's not like their 4 wins were impressive, and the worst part is in the games that were against playoff teams, not a lot of them were close. To put simply, he also had a terrible coaching game at the end. I'll have the link for that too, another in-depth review early in the year. I'm pretty sure it's like week 6 against the Stars, which would have really helped him in the playoff race. But what helped him even more was the fact that in week 9, they were playing the Breakers. To put it simply, this game, if the Bandits had won, all they'd have to do is win in week 10 or the Breakers lose in week 10 to make the playoffs. Instead, they got beat in this game by 11 points, so it wasn't even a one-score game. And they got just totally beat by them, and that eliminated them from the playoffs. Now, as the Showboats, will they get better? I hope. Will they? I don't know for sure. But Todd Haley, 6 is definitely a fair spot for him, as this team definitely really was a letdown. There were multiple games they should have won that they didn't, and it's usually due to poor coaching or just poor ways the team plays. It's just Todd Haley's at 6, and I think it's a fair spot for him. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Kevin Sumlin. He also did not change from last year. I was debating him on actually putting him up at 4 and moving it up a spot. Yes, I know they went 3-7 during the year, but here's the thing. The most notable stat is the fact that they did have halftime leads in 9 of their 10 games. So for 9 of their games, they were legitimately winning going into halftime. The problem was they couldn't finish well. They went 3-6 in those games they had halftime lead, and note that 2 of those were at the end of the year. So like at the end of the year when they had a couple wins pretty much. So for the most part, through basically the first 7 games, they could have easily been undefeated or only had 1 loss. But usually it was either poor play by the offense, defense, coaching, whatever at the end that usually screwed them over. Though their most notable game for the first time is a positive in week 9. They gave the Stallions the only loss they got the entire year, including the playoffs. As unlike every other game pretty much, they didn't blow it at the end. They had a great defensive stop. Abernathy got an interception, which all but sealed the game, as then it left the Stallions with 10 seconds left on their final drive a few plays later. And that Gamblers win was great. They went from being 1-7 to ending the year on a 2-game winning streak. And with their defense being as good as it is, as long as a lot of those players come back, and come back healthy in some cases, this team legitimately could be great next year. But you have to see who comes back, who's healthy and all that. But Sumlin definitely deserves to be at 5. I don't think he deserves to move down, and I would have argued he moved up. Moving up 4 spots are the Breakers head coach, as it is no longer Larry Fedora, but it is John DeFilippo, as Fedora stepped down or, gotten left, depending on who you want to believe. But to put it simply, DeFilippo is moving up 4 spots for the Breakers head coaches. This is really due to the fact that I'm trying to view him as a neutral head coach, and would I rather have a neutral guy versus other guys? And someone was the real debater one. I definitely would have DeFilippo over the other 3 guys, the Wilson, the Fisher, or Haley. But to put it simply in terms of him, he's taken over a 6-4 team that is without Kyle Sloter, which honestly might be a good thing, as even though Sloter was also a quarterback, as I've talked before, he really was overrated, as his interceptions really were a bad thing. As for DeFilippo, his most notable stat, however, is the fact that the 2 years he was an OC in the NFL, he led bottom half offenses, the Vikings and the Jaguars. And depending on what offensive stat you like to use the most, whether it be rushing, passing, or points, he was arguably leading 2 bottom 10 offenses during his time. But his most notable game is Super Bowl 52. He was the quarterback coach for, what was Carson Wentz and then Nick Foles. And naturally, Foles had one of the best games we've seen in a while in the Super Bowl, and the Eagles ended up winning 41-33. So he was a very key contributor to that team, as when you look at as soon as he was gone from the Eagles, you can make a very strong case that he was the most impactful person to Carson Wentz's being good. As in 2017, he was going to be the MVP if he stayed healthy, and since then, literally, he has not been at any point a top 10 quarterback. He wasn't when he came back the next year, he wasn't with the Colts with his OC. Just basically everything hasn't worked out, except when he was with John DeFilippo on his second year. So, is 4 maybe high for him? I don't think so. but I do think that he has a very good shot to go back to the playoffs with the Breakers. I think this team overall is still, even with the departures that they're having, with Sal Cannella being gone, Slaughter being gone, as long as they, keep going, as long as they get Shea to develop a bit, they could be good, decent again, especially with DiFilippo's quarterback experience, but we'll see. Staying put at number 3 is going to be Mike Riley. The Coach of the Year last year is at 3, so why is the Coach of the Year only at 3? Well, mainly it's due to the semifinal game. As I've mentioned before, I put most of the blame on him for the Generals losing that game. As heading into that game, he had a 9-win streak, which, as the stat I said, is the longest winning streak any team had last year. And they headed into that game, and they lost mainly due to his coaching. DeAndre had been hurt a couple weeks before, but he was active for that game, and at no point did he ever put in DeAndre, despite the fact that the whole year it was basically a 2-quarterback system, which is what worked for them. And despite the fact that Perez was terrible that game, despite the fact that they weren't running the ball as well as they should, they didn't put DeAndre in. Even if DeAndre is hurt, if you put him in, it's that theory. It's just like the story if you've heard about one of the Broncos Super Bowls where Terrell Davis couldn't see because of a migraine, but they put him out there anyway to make the appearance that he would. It's that same thing. If you put DeAndre in there, you're going to force the Stars to have to change something about their defense to watch him just in case he does run. The fact they never did that made it harder for Thunder and Lightning, Williams and Victor to get on the ground. And with Perez having a terrible game, it overall just ended up terribly. If it wasn't for Turpin's return touchdown, this game could have been an easy blowout for the Stars. So that's why I have him down at 3. That being said, throughout the regular season, he was a great coach. Personally, I don't think I would have had him be Coach of the Year, if I'm being honest, pending your argument, though that's also depending on how you view it. But I definitely do think he deserves to be at 3. He was a very solid coach. It's just that last game of the season for him last year is what keeps him from being a top 2 coach. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Skip Holtz. He moves up 2 spots from last year, as the reasons are pretty simple. He had 1 loss across the whole year, which is the least by any team. So in total, he went 11-1 if you count the playoffs. And his most notable game was the championship against the Stars, where he, won the championship. So I have him at 2. Now, this is probably the most controversial placing on the list, as I'm putting the champion head coach at 2, especially when you consider the fact of how he did what he did this year, during that year. As his starting quarterback was playing terribly, got a minor injury, then their backup came in, their backup played substantially well for a few weeks, and then during the end of the year, Jamar just kind of fell off, and the team was still able to win a lot of those games at the end, aside from one. And then into the playoffs, Jamar's back is at playing a great level. Then he gets hurt in the title game, and they have to go back to Alex Magoo, the OG starter, and they still get it done. Yes, it was barely, but they did get it done. But why do I have him at 2? I think the guy at 1 did a slightly better job overall, and I do say that mainly because I think when you look at the Stallions team, it really was a loaded team overall. I mean, Scooby Wright and DeMarcus Gates as your 2 linebackers was an incredible duo. Victor Bolden Jr. and Marlon Williams as receivers was probably the best tandem in the entire league. And then not to mention you had a really stacked offensive line. The only part of it that you could say wasn't great was the running backs, but when Bo Scarborough came, he immediately lit a fire under that team. And so I'm putting him at 2 just because I think his team was better than the guy at 1. I think the guy at 1 did more with less. In theory, he accomplished more than expected versus Skip, if you get what I mean. But Skip Holtz definitely deserves to be a top 2 coach. I think that if you have him anywhere below 2, you're insane. But I'm putting him at 2, just barely. Coming in at number 1 is going to be Bart Andrus. He is staying put, as I expected him to be the best coach in the league last year. And this year, well, I'm doing the same thing. To put it simply, last year, even though he went 6-4, and yes, all 6 wins were against non-playoff teams, which is the notable stat. But the thing is that shows that he did not lose to any team that wasn't truly a quality team, as he played them 6 times versus, a team like the Bandits who only could play them 4 times due to the division stuff. Though, I will say this, all but one of his games against playoff teams were basically 1-score games as well. So overall, they really were in a lot of games, and when it mattered, they beat the Generals. They were 0-2 heading into that playoff game against them, and they got the job done and beat them. And the real reason I have him at number 1 is the fact that through 3 weeks of the season, or I guess 2.5, Brian Scott was the best quarterback in the league, with the only argument being Jamar Smith. He got hurt and was out for the whole year, and they had to go to their backup, Case Cookus. And all Cookus did was just continue to cook. I know, funny. And he cooked all the way to getting him to the playoffs and getting him to the title game. And then he got hurt at the end, and they had to go to KJ Costello. And despite his pick six, the Stars were literally a few plays from winning the game. They converted on their fourth down attempt to get the ball back, and they were able to just keep going. It didn't work out at the very end, but the fact that they nearly beat the, at that point, 10-1 Birmingham Stallions with KJ Costello, who is, let's just put it simply, a lot worse than, Case Cookus, Brian Scott, Jamar Smith, and Alex Magoo, is incredible. I think that Bart deserves to be number one as well. As I always said, that this team was basically a big four. You had really 4 players over the year, arguably 5 with Bug Howard, but it was mainly Cookus, Stribling, Rodriguez, and then Colburn. That was basically their team, as well as, I guess, Bug Howard. If you go to just anyone who watched a few USFL games, you're not going to name a receiver on the Stars, like a wide receiver. You're not going to name any other defender. It was those 4 players, and even then, Rodriguez wasn't talked about a ton. And the fact that that team made it to the playoffs, beat the Generals, and then nearly beat the Stallions is why I think that he did overall more with what he had versus Holtz. As yes, Holtz accomplished more overall, but his expectancy was a lot higher than this Stars team. And I think that overall, when you look at what Andrews did this year, or in 2022, I think he did a great job, all things considered. And heading into this next year, it's going to be really fun to see what happens with this team, as we'll see it about what happens to their quarterback situation. Because at least at this moment, we still don't know what it is. Because now that Cookus went to the NFL, he might go to the XFL, he might come back. Brian Scott was supposed to go to the XFL, technically hasn't because he can't right now. So we don't know what they're going to have for sure, but I feel that no matter who they have, this team is going to be set up for success with Bart Andrews. That's why he's my number one coach. So that'll do it for my list of all the coaches from the USFL. If you guys have any ones that you think are different or you'd like to change, explain why and mention that in the comments. If you have any ideas for a video, since we're still kind of in that slow period until about January for the USFL, as before, just leave it in the comments if you have any video ideas if you want. And naturally, have a great night. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. See you guys next time.